Detroit had a corporate rule that said no GM car smaller than a full size could be equipped with an engine bigger than 400 cubic inches. Written policy, handed down from the executive suites. And for a few extraordinary years in the late 1960s, some of the fastest cars ever to roll off a dealer lot were built in direct violation of it. Not by factories, not by racing teams, by car dealers. Guys with showrooms and lifts and a clear understanding that their customers wanted something the suits in Detroit were too scared to officially offer. And here's what makes it wild. Detroit knew exactly what was happening. They just chose not to look.
To understand why dealer-built supercars existed at all, you have to understand the corporate politics that created the space for them. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association passed a resolution urging its members to pull back from motorsports promotion. The idea was to get ahead of government regulation after high-profile racing tragedies drew negative press. Every major manufacturer signed on. Most quietly ignored it when it suited them, but General Motors actually tried to enforce it internally, and that created a bizarre contradiction. By the mid-1960s, GM had some of the most powerful engines ever put into an American car. The 427 cubic inch V8, producing 425 horsepower in the Corvette, was a proven monster. But corporate policy forbade that engine from going into anything smaller. Camaros, Chevelles, Novas, all off limits for anything above 400 cubes. The reasoning was a mix of liability fears, insurance industry pressure, and a genuine concern about attracting congressional attention to how fast GM's cars were getting. The problem was that the market didn't care about any of that. The 1964 GTO had already proven that buyers would pay a premium for factory performance. Ford and Chrysler were building their own muscle machines, and the customers walking into Chevrolet showrooms were getting increasingly frustrated that the fastest Camaro they could officially buy wasn't fast enough. That frustration was exactly the opening that a handful of extraordinary dealers stepped through.
Before any of the names that dominate this story, there was Royal Pontiac, a dealership in Royal Oak, Michigan, just blocks from Woodward Avenue, the spiritual home of American street racing, run by a man named Ace Wilson. Around 1959, Wilson started tuning his Pontiacs. Not dramatically at first, a carb rejet here, a distributor recurve there. But with help from a young advertising man named Jim Wangers, who raced on weekends and worked the Pontiac account during the week, Royal developed a reputation fast. Their cars won, consistently. By the early 1960s, Pontiac's own division was quietly leaning into it. John DeLorean made sure that press cars sent to automotive journalists were Royal Bobcat prepped. That famous 1964 car and driver test where a Pontiac GTO faced off against a Ferrari GTO, the Pontiac was a Royal Bobcat car running a 421 tri-power engine that wasn't even a listed production option. Nobody at the test track knew the difference. Pontiac's V8s all looked the same from the outside. The American car won. The Royal Bobcat package itself was a precisely engineered collection of up to 38 individual modifications: thinner head gaskets to raise compression, recurved distributor timing, rejetted carburetors, heavier valve springs to eliminate float at high RPM, a blocked heat riser to run cooler. The result was a reliable 40 to 50 additional horsepower, with no obvious external signs that anything had been touched. By 1966, Royal's mail-order performance kits were moving over 1,000 units annually. You could order the parts from a catalog, do the work yourself, and have a Royal Bobcat without ever visiting Michigan. Ace Wilson hadn't just built a performance car business, he'd built a brand, and that model became the blueprint that everyone who came after would follow. Don Yenko ran a Chevrolet dealership in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, and he had a simple problem. His customers wanted a 427 in their Camaro, and Chevrolet's corporate policy said no. For 1967 and 1968, his solution was straightforward and labor-intensive. He ordered Camaros with the largest available factory engine, the L78 396, then had his shop pull the 396 out and drop in the L72 427 from the Corvette parts bin. Expensive, time-consuming, but the result was undeniable. Yenko rated these cars at 450 horsepower. They rammed the quarter mile in the low 13s straight off the floor. But Yenko wanted scale, and in 1969 he found a way to get Chevrolet to do the hard part for him. The tool was called the Central Office Production Order System, COPO. It had been designed for fleet purchases, police cars, taxicabs, unusual commercial configurations. It was a backdoor ordering channel that bypassed the standard option lists entirely. And critically, nobody in GM's corporate structure had specifically prohibited using it to build a 427 Camaro. Yenko negotiated COPO order number 9561. Under that order, Chevrolet's Norwood, Ohio assembly plant would install the iron block L72 427 directly into Camaros on the factory line, not as an aftermarket swap, as factory-installed equipment, with a full GM 5-year, 50,000-mile warranty. The engine spec was serious. 4-bolt mains, forged steel crank, forged rods, solid mechanical lifters, 11-to-1 compression, a high-rise aluminum intake, and a Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel. The cars shipped with a cowl induction hood, a 4.10-to-1 posi rear end, and heavy-duty suspension. In period testing, they ran mid-12s to low 13s in stock form. On slicks with headers, they went into the 11s at over 114 miles per hour. Yenko ordered 201 for his own dealership and set up a nationwide network of 36 dealers to move the rest. He applied the same COPO logic to the Chevelle. Between Yenko's orders and other dealers who figured out what the system could do, roughly 1,427 powered Camaros rolled out of Norwood in 1969 alone. GM knew their own assembly plant was building these cars, but as long as no press release went out and no exterior engine badging went on, the corporation could maintain distance. The 427 Camaro didn't officially exist, it just kept coming off the line. While Yenko was working the system from the inside, Joel Rosen was doing something even more audacious from a speed shop on Long Island. Rosen had started Motion Performance in the late 1950s, eventually landing at 598 Sunrise Highway in Baldwin, New York. In 1966, he partnered with nearby Baldwin Chevrolet, and Baldwin Motion was born. The setup was clean. A customer would buy a new Camaro, Chevelle, Nova, or Corvette from Baldwin Chevrolet and immediately have it driven next door to Motion Performance. Rosen's team would transform it into something the factory would never build, and the customer could finance the whole package through GMAC. The Phase 3 builds were the ones that made national magazines sit up. The Phase 3 427 made 500 horsepower. Phase 3 454 cars pushed well beyond that, and Rosen backed every single one with a written, money-back performance guarantee. His cars would run 11.50 seconds or better at 120 miles per hour or faster at a sanctioned drag strip with an approved driver, or your money back. No refund was ever issued, not once. If a customer fell short of the number, Rosen would send one of his own drivers to make the attempt. His cars always performed. These weren't race-only machines either. Customers daily drove them. They were streetable, warranted, GMAC-financed cars that happened to be capable of running in the 11s on demand. Baldwin Motion appeared constantly in hot rod, carcraft, and superstock through the late 1960s and early 1970s. Joel Rosen was not hiding. He ran national ads. His operation was completely visible. Between 1967 and 1974, Baldwin Motion produced around 500 custom vehicles. Then came the car that ended it all, the Motion Super Vega. A Chevrolet Vega with a turbocharged big block V8 producing over 600 horsepower. Carcraft called it King Kong lives on Long Island. The EPA and the Department of Justice showed up shortly after.
Rosen paid a $500 fine and agreed to stop building modified streetcars for American roads. By 1974, Baldwin Chevrolet had closed, and one of the greatest chapters in American performance history was done.
The COPO story belongs to the GM world, but Ford had its own version, and it produced one of the most consequential engines in Mustang history. Bob Tasca Sr. ran the second highest volume Ford dealership in the country out of Providence, Rhode Island. By 1967, he was watching Ford's performance reputation erode in real time. The 390 cubic inch V8 going into Mustangs wasn't competitive against what Chevrolet was offering in the Camaro. Tasca's customers knew it. His sales numbers felt it. Rather than file a complaint up the chain, Tasca handed the problem to his mechanic and drag racer, Bill Gilbert, with one instruction: fix it using nothing but factory Ford parts from the dealer catalog. Gilbert pulled a 428 Police Interceptor short block, designed for law enforcement vehicles, built for durability, and discovered that 427 cylinder heads bolted on with minimal modification. He added a recurved 427 distributor, a 427 oil pump, an aluminum intake, and a custom-ground camshaft. The resulting Mustang ran low 13-second quarter miles on street tires with the exhaust still closed. Tasca named it the KR8 and drove it himself from Rhode Island to Dearborn to show Ford's engineers. They were impressed enough to keep the car and reluctant enough to delay action, so Tasca pushed harder. A November 1967 Hot Rod magazine feature included a reader ballot that could be torn out and mailed directly to Henry Ford II. Thousands were sent. Ford couldn't ignore the combination of dealer pressure, press coverage, and direct consumer demand hitting the chairman's desk simultaneously. In April 1968, Ford officially announced the 428 Cobra Jet. It was rated at 335 horsepower, a deliberately understated number designed to confuse insurance actuaries and drag strip class officials. Real-world dyno tests consistently showed output closer to 400. At the 1968 NHRA Winter Nationals, 50 lightweight Cobra Jet Mustangs dominated superstock competition, with two Fords meeting in the final. A dealer in Rhode Island had just changed what a Mustang was. It wasn't just GM and Ford. In Chicago, a Dodge dealer named Norm Krause ran Grand Spalding Dodge, named for the corner of Grand Avenue and Spalding where it sat, and he was doing the exact same thing for Mopar. Mr. Norm's specialty was turning factory Dodge iron into turnkey drag weapons. 426 Hemi Darts and Barracudas, superstock Coronets, big block Demons. Chrysler, like GM, had corporate reservations about officially endorsing these cars as street machines. Norm Krause didn't share those reservations. His customers drove them on public roads, raced them on weekends, and came back for more. Chrysler knew. They fed him factory performance parts, gave him early access to new models, and quietly let him build the brand image their own PR department couldn't officially create. Grand Spalding became for Dodge what Royal Pontiac had been for Pontiac, the place serious buyers went when the factory wasn't willing to go far enough. The era ended the way most good things in automotive history end, a combination of insurance premiums, emissions regulations, and federal enforcement making the economics impossible. By the mid-1970s, the same cars that had been brutally fast daily drivers were being priced out of existence by surcharges and strangled by compression cuts. But what these dealers built didn't disappear. It went into garages, into collections, into barns. And as the decades passed, what had been ordinary performance cars became something else entirely. Today, a documented 1969 Yenko COPO Camaro sells deep into six figures at auction. A legitimate Baldwin Motion Phase 3 car is rarer still, because Rosen never rebadged a factory COPO. Every build was unique, and the paperwork tells the story. The Tasca legacy is arguably the most permanent of all, because it didn't end with collector cars. It ended with a production engine that powered Mustangs, Torinos, and Mercurys for years. These men, Ace Wilson, Don Yenko, Joel Rosen, Bob Tosca, Norm Kraus weren't factory engineers. They didn't have corporate expense accounts or dedicated R&D budgets. They had lift bays, parts catalogs, and a precise understanding of what their customers actually wanted. And in a period when Detroit's official posture was cautious and politically managed, they built the cars the factories were too nervous to put their own names on. Detroit pretended not to see it, and for a few extraordinary years, that was exactly the right arrangement for everyone involved. If you want more deep dives into American automotive history, the real history, not just the official version, subscribe and drop a comment below. Which of these dealer-built machines would you put in your garage? The Yenko Camaro, the Baldwin Motion Phase 3, or the Tosca Cobra Jet Mustang? I'll see you in the next one.